So I suppose when we're talking about this space between stimulus and response, I think one of the things that we're talking about is choice. And when we're talking about choice, I think we're also talking about the criteria that you use to make a choice. And for me, one of the things that's been the most formative thing in my life has been being a part of a really vibrant DIY kind of punk community, which instilled this ethos of empowerment in me at a very young age. The idea that if you want something done, go and do it, and you don't need to ask for permission to do it. And in particularly, one of the people that I would really look up to in that is a guy called Ian Mackay, who ran this record label in DC, still runs this record label, and is a big kind of towering figure in DIY punk. He was in a bunch of bands like Fugazi and Minor Threat. And I had the pleasure of interviewing him for a film that I was making in 2007. And he said, at one point he said, don't do anything for the sake of, to try and get to that point over there, because you might never get there. He's like, or you might get there and you might find that it's not what you thought it was. Far better to make sure that what you're doing in the here and now is important in and of itself. And he kind of said then, like, take this film that we're making. This might never get made, and I think he genuinely thought it wouldn't. He said, but you seem to have had a pretty good time making it, and I've had a pretty good time talking to you, so what if it never gets made? And that summed it up for me, and I've always thought of that as my criteria when I'm making a decision. And I think there's two different types of decisions, two different ways of making decisions. The first is one where I think you kind of, it's one my dad taught me. He said, if anything's a difficult choice, just put it in your head and then leave it there and give it the time that it needs, and eventually what you have to do will surface, which kind of, I was agreeing with what Colin was saying, that it's what must be done. You just know after a while, and it might take an hour, it might take a day, it might take a month. For me, the most difficult decision I ever made was in December 2010. I decided to run in the general election in Dublin South East, which wasn't something I'd particularly wanted to do that November, but gave myself the month to think, yes, this is something that I definitely think I need to do, and I feel totally satisfied in having done that. But the other type of decision is the kind of brash one, where you're on the spot. And I think once you have to make one of those and it works out, you kind of don't really go back on it ever again. You know what you need to do always. And for me, one of those was in 2005. It was my first time traveling away from home on my own, and I went to New York for a week. And I went out to Long Island to this DIY show that was happening. And there was a band called Ghost Mice playing, and I got talking to them because I'd actually seen them playing beside a bonfire in a field in Kilcool in County Wicklow a year and a half before, which for anyone from Ireland is where Glen Rowe was filmed. Its main claim to fame. And I said, do you remember that? And they were like, of course, that was one of our favourite shows. So anyway, we ended up staying in the same house that night, and they said, be cool if you wanted to come on tour with us. And I was like, yeah, I probably won't be able to. All my bags are in New York. I just came here for a day, and they were going to Connecticut. And then, so I didn't think about it. And the next morning, they were like, we're going if you want to come with us. And I was like, they were on tour in a 36-foot yellow school bus. And I was like, bags, New York, 36-foot yellow school bus. I probably shouldn't do this, but I'll really regret it if I don't. And I just said, fuck it. And I just got on the bus. And two years later, I got such good friends with that band that I ended up driving them 12,000 miles around Europe in a little Volkswagen Golf, and going to the Arctic Circle, and then with them on tour again in that same bus over to the Grand Canyon. And I remember lying on the tarmac of the Grand Canyon looking at the stars there, because there's so little light pollution, just thinking this all hinged on that split-second decision of whether to get in the bus. So thereafter, if ever I was in two minds of anything, I just said, just do it. But not always, I think with stimulus, it's not always the scenario that's presented isn't always one that you would choose or one of your making, and you've no choice about that. But what you do have a choice with is what you do with the stimulus once it has happened. And usually change happens gradually, but occasionally it kind of happens all at once. And for me, the biggest kind of year marked in my life was 2006, because I just finished school, and it was the summer of 2006. I'd been playing in my first band, and the band was kind of coming to an end. I knew it was going to be breaking up soon. I'd been living in Wicklow throughout school, and I started living in Dublin. And this place called Paddy's Hall, which was this old parochial hall, which was awaiting demolition, and we used it for gigs for like 2 or 3 years, and it was basically our space with nobody else in charge, in Greystones, and that got demolished in 2006 as well. So our main kind of focal point had been taken away. And then my dad died as well. So that was kind of like, a load of things happened at once, which were all things that I would have thought, you know, what do you do when all the things which you think define your life and are the important things in your life, when they all seemingly stop? Now, they didn't all stop. I still had all my friends and family around me, but when all of that comes to an end, suddenly you kind of feel like you've been totally drained and empty. And what do you do to kind of to get back? Do you kind of stay laboring on that, or what do you do? And obviously the only thing you can do is to start again. So I inherited the house from my dad, and I was like, well, here's a building, and we don't have Paddy's Hall to do gigs anymore in, so why don't we do the gigs in the house? So that October, this all happened around kind of July, August. That October, my band did play our last gig, and we did it in the house, and this band from the US called Defiance, Ohio played too. And that was the first gig in what would become, the house became known as the Hideaway House, and over 50 bands over the next 4 years came and played shows in the house. And it spawned a kind of record label, because all my friends were playing too, and there was some amazing bands. So I started Hideaway Records out of that. One of the bands went on to do really well and are still doing well, a band called Heathers. And then we made this film, which was about the whole DIY thing. And then I got asked to go and talk about music on a TV show, because I was a young person and I seemingly was supposedly knew about music if I was releasing music. And then that led to me presenting a TV show, and it's led to the career that I'm kind of doing now, which is a bizarre. I never thought putting on like sweaty gigs for like sweaty punks in the back of my 2 up 2 down semi-D would have led to kind of a career path that I hadn't expected to take. But there you go. Yes. So after the 4 years in Hideaway, I kind of learned a lot through all of that experience and through building up something really strong again. And when I'd been younger, I used to worry how things would play out in life, like how would I get through my junior cert, how would I get through my leaving cert, and how would I deal with if one of my parents died. It was like, I think it's a great fear of everybody. And then I found that after all those things happened, I was still breathing, and you kind of find the strength to deal with anything. So I stopped worrying, which is kind of the echoes what Colin was saying earlier about the things just make sense and they just have to be done. There's no courage involved. Everything seems obvious, like of course I will do this. Why would you do anything different? And I've started to kind of think about, and I've said this to friends so many times as well, when they're kind of thinking about something, that life is kind of a bit like one of those travelators in the airport, you know, that you have to like walk along. It's kind of futile to try and stand still or to go back. And if you don't look where you're going, you probably trip up on somebody else. So it's kind of, if you're inevitably going forward, you have to decide, well, where am I going to put my foot first? And watch where you're going. And that once you kind of accept that, I think you realize how important it is, because new eras, as soon as an era ends, a new one needs to be forged. And if you stop being concerned with what is about to happen, you kind of leave it up to other people to create that. And I kind of think back to that first gig that I did in the house. This band called Defiance, Ohio were playing, and they had a song called Sometimes Motion. And the chorus of it, I think, is absolutely defining of the concept of change, which is, it just repeats the line, sometimes motion is the only thing that keeps us alive. Sometimes motion is the only thing that keeps us alive. So that's a note that I'll finish on. Thanks.